Looking back, there had been a warning sign, but grief has a way of blurring the edges of a moment. At our mother's funeral, my brother walked in wearing a Rolex I'd never seen in my life. I noticed it, but only in the vague way you notice a detail when your mind is occupied with something heavier. What I didn't notice was the manila folder tucked under his arm. 2 hours later, we were standing at the cemetery as the workers lowered our mother's casket into the frozen ground. The air was sharp, the kind that bites at your lungs. That was when my brother gripped my shoulder so hard it left bruises and told me to sign over the deed to our family's lakefront property. There was no warmth in his voice, just urgency and entitlement. When I told him no, he crossed a line I never imagined he would. I didn't shout. I didn't argue in front of the grave. I simply turned away, walked to my truck, and made a single phone call. The moment he realized who I was dialing, the color drained from his face. He went as pale as the February snow under our feet. Before explaining what happened next, it might help to know who I am. My name is Robert MacDonald, though most people just call me Bob. I'm 62 years old and spent 34 years working as a firefighter in Victoria, British Columbia. It's the kind of job that teaches you over and over again what actually matters when everything is literally going up in flames. And here's the thing, in those moments, it's never the money. My mother, Catherine MacDonald, died on Valentine's Day. In a strange way, it suited her. She always claimed that love was the only thing that made life worthwhile. She was 87 when she passed, mind still sharp, opinions even sharper, and as stubborn at the end as she had been her whole life. After my father was killed in a logging accident back in '73, she raised 3 kids on a nurse's salary. My older brother Graham, me in the middle, and our younger sister Jennifer. It wasn't easy, but she never let us see how hard it really was. For the last 5 years of her life, she lived with me and my wife, Susan, in our place near Mount Douglas. Her arthritis had gotten bad enough that simple, everyday tasks were a struggle, and she needed more help than she would ever admit. Jennifer lived just 2 streets away and stopped by almost every day. Most mornings, the 3 of us would sit around the kitchen table with coffee, drifting from serious conversations to idle chatter. Mom would slip into her stories like they were well-worn shoes, tales about working as a nurse at the Royal Jubilee Hospital in the 1950 seconds, about dancing under the lights at the old Crystal Garden, about the house Dad built with his own hands out by Elk Lake before he died. That house. That beautiful, cursed house. My dad built that place in 1968. It wasn't anything grand. Just a small 2-bedroom cabin sitting on 3 acres of lakefront land. But he put himself into it, piece by piece. Every beam he lifted, every window he set, every stone he placed in the fireplace felt like part of him. Back then, Elk Lake was mostly untouched. More trees than houses, more quiet than traffic. Things are different now. Victoria has stretched out in all directions, and that little patch of land is suddenly prime real estate worth close to $3 million. My mother was well aware of that. So were we. But no one understood it more clearly than Graham. My brother left for Toronto about 30 years ago and built his life around real estate development, buying low, building up, selling higher. He made a fortune doing it. He'd fly back home maybe once every couple of years, check into the Fairmont instead of staying with family, take Mom out for a single nice dinner, and then disappear again, always blaming tight schedules and urgent projects. The phone stayed quiet most of the time between those visits. Jennifer and I used to joke that Graham had swapped his heart for a calculator. Mom never criticized him, at least not out loud, but the hurt was there in the little things. Every Christmas, she'd set an extra place at the table for him, just in case he showed up. That plate stayed empty year after year. When she was diagnosed with congestive heart failure last October, I called him. I told Graham that if he wanted to see her while he still could, he shouldn't wait too long. He said he'd try to fit it in. He never did. Jennifer eventually got on a plane to Toronto and walked into his office herself. She confronted him face to face, and he gave her the same promise he'd come next month. That next month never arrived. Mom passed away quietly in her sleep, a photo of Dad clutched in her hand. Susan found her the next morning when she brought in a cup of tea. The night before, Mom's last words to me had been, "Bobby, promise me you'll take care of Jennifer. Your brother, he's lost, but your sister needs you." I gave her my word. Planning the funeral felt like walking through wet cement, slow, heavy, exhausting. Jennifer and I took care of everything together: the church, the flowers, the notices, the burial. Meanwhile, Graham's phone went straight to voicemail. 3 days before the service, he finally sent a text. "Landing Wednesday. Staying at the hotel. Send me the details." "No, I'm sorry." "No. How are you holding up?" "Just logistics." He flew in the night before the funeral. He didn't come by the house. He didn't ask to see Mom one last time at the funeral home. He just checked into the Hotel Grand Pacific and texted that he'd meet us at the church. The funeral was held at St. Andrew's Presbyterian, the same church where my parents had been married back in 1956. It was on February 18th at 11 in the morning. The place was full, more than 200 people at least. Former co-workers from the hospital, neighbors, firefighters I'd served with, Jennifer's friends, people from Mom's book club and her bridge group, and a whole crowd from the senior center where she'd volunteered for 2 decades. It felt like every part of her life was represented in those pews. Graham slipped in about 5 minutes late. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit, polished Italian leather shoes, and that Rolex I'd never seen before. His hair was perfectly styled, with just enough silver at the temples to give him that expensive, distinguished look. He could have been walking out of a Bay Street boardroom instead of into our mother's funeral. He took a seat beside Jennifer and me in the front row, but never really looked at either of us. His eyes stayed fixed on the front, and he checked his phone twice during the service, like he had better places to be. Pastor Williams delivered a beautiful eulogy. He spoke about Mom's kindness, her years of service, her steady faith that never seemed to shake, no matter what life threw at her. Jennifer read a poem Mom had loved, her voice trembling but steady enough to get through it. When it was my turn, I couldn't manage the speech I'd prepared. Grief just rose up and closed my throat. So instead, I shared a single memory: Mom teaching me to fish at Elk Lake when I was 7. How I kept tangling the line over and over. How she never got impatient, never snapped, just laughed softly and showed me again and again what to do. She'd smiled at me that day on the dock and said, "Bobby, the fish will wait. Life won't. Pay attention to what's right in front of you." When I repeated those words in the church, people laughed softly through their tears. It was one of those moments where shared grief feels almost gentle. The whole place seemed to breathe with me, everyone except Graham. He sat rigid, face unreadable, his knee bouncing impatiently like he was counting down the minutes. After the service, we made our way to Ross Bay Cemetery, the one that looks out over the ocean. Mom had always wanted to be buried beside Dad. We'd bought the plot years earlier and kept it waiting for this day, even though none of us wanted to think about it. The cold there felt different, sharper, weighted with damp. It was that particular kind of Victoria cold that seeps through your coat, your gloves, your bones. The sky hung low and gray, and the wind came howling in off the strait, carrying the threat of rain. About 60 people followed us to the graveside. Only close family and close friends now, the inner circle. We gathered in a loose semicircle around the open grave while the funeral director and his staff made their quiet preparations. Jennifer leaned into her husband Mark, crying into his shoulder. Susan's fingers were wrapped around mine, her grip firm and steady. Graham stood off to the side, nearer the back, with his hands stuffed in his coat pockets, as if he were attending someone else's funeral entirely. Pastor Williams spoke the final words, those old, familiar ones about ashes and dust, his voice low against the wind. Then the casket began its slow descent into the ground, the metal winch creaking in the heavy silence as we watched our mother being lowered into the earth. That was the moment everything broke. I felt a hand clamp down on my shoulder, hard enough to hurt. I turned, startled, and saw Graham standing beside me. His face was too close, his breath a pale cloud in the freezing air. "We need to talk," he said. "Graham, this isn't the time," I whispered. It's exactly the time. He pulled the manila folder out from under his arm and shoved it toward me. The lake house, he said. We're selling it. I already have a developer lined up. $4 million. Firm offer. Closing in 30 days. Sign here. I just stared at him. Around us, people were beginning to turn, sensing something was wrong. The casket was still being lowered into the ground. Our mother was still being laid to rest. Graham, what the hell are you doing? I asked. I'm doing what needs to be done, he replied. His tone had shifted into that polished boardroom voice, impersonal, precise, almost mechanical. That property has been sitting there gaining value for decades. Mom's gone. It's time to liquidate the asset. He didn't even flinch at the word, asset. You'll get your share. Jennifer will too, he went on. $1.3 million each after taxes and fees. Not bad for a little shack on a lake. That's not a shack, I said. That's Dad's. Dad's been dead 50 years, he cut in. It's real estate. Sign the papers. By then, Jennifer had turned around, her face drained of color. Graham, what are you doing? She asked, voice unsteady. I'm handling the estate, he said, loud enough for others to hear. Since neither of you seems capable of making adult decisions, people were openly watching now. The pastor had fallen silent. The funeral director stood frozen, looking like he wanted to disappear. The winch hummed quietly as our mother's casket continued its slow descent. I'm not signing anything, I said, pulling my shoulder out of his grip. Not here, not now, and definitely not without reading what's in that folder. Graham's expression hardened. You don't need to read it, he snapped. I'm the executor. I'm telling you what we're doing. Executor, Jennifer corrected softly, her voice cracking. Mom made you executor? Of course she did, he said. I'm the oldest. I'm the successful one. I'm the one who knows how to handle money. The way he said successful hung in the air like an insult, as if Jennifer's 30 years of teaching kids didn't count, as if my 3 decades running into burning buildings meant nothing at all. Graham, I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice steady. We were standing at our mother's grave, surrounded by about 60 people who had come to say goodbye. I gestured slightly toward them and tried one last time to slow him down. Graham, this is Mom's funeral, I said. There are 60 people here. Can this wait until tomorrow? No, he said flatly. The developer needs an answer by Friday. We're listing on Monday. I've already talked to a realtor. You've already? Jennifer stared at him, stunned, then stepped closer. Graham, you can't just decide this on your own. That's our family home. That's where Dad... That's where Dad what? He cut in. Died? He's not there anymore, Jenny. And neither is Mom. It's time to move on and cash out. By then, the funeral director's team had stopped the winch. The casket hung there, suspended halfway down, while everyone stood frozen, forced to watch our private disaster play out in public. I could feel the heat rising in my face, part fury, part humiliation. No, Graham, I said, and this time my voice came out sharper than I intended. We'll talk about it later, with lawyers present if we have to. Right now, we're burying our mother. Show some respect. Something changed in his expression then. The mask slipped, and what replaced it was a look of open contempt. He stepped in so close I could smell his cologne, layered with coffee and mint on his breath. Listen to me very carefully, little brother, he said, his voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. You've been playing house with Mom for 5 years thinking you're some kind of hero. You're not. You're a broke, retired firefighter living off a pension. I'm offering you more money than you'll see in the next 10 years, he said. This is a gift. Take it. It's not about the money, I replied. Everything is about money. You're just too stupid to realize it. It wasn't anger that rose up in me then. It was something sharper, cleaner, like a lens snapping into focus. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I understood what Mom must have seen all those years. A man who had traded everything real for everything valuable, and no longer knew there was a difference. No, I said. The color rushed into his face. What do you mean no? he demanded. I'm not selling, I answered, my voice steady. Not to you, not to your developer, not for 4 million or 40. That house was Dad's dream. Mom lived there for 40 years. Jennifer and I are not selling. You don't have a choice, he shot back. I'm the executor. I have legal authority. Then get a lawyer, I said. We'll see you in court, but right now, step away from our mother's grave. I turned my back on him. A mistake. As it turned out, I heard Jennifer gasp before I felt a thing. Then Graham's hand was in my hair, yanking my head backwards so hard it felt like my scalp was on fire. I stumbled on the frozen ground, boots slipping as I tried to find my balance. He spun me around, and before my mind could catch up to what was happening, his fist smashed into my jaw. The world tilted sideways. I dropped hard onto one knee, my hand slamming against the cold metal frame of a folding chair. The sharp, metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. All around us, the quiet of the cemetery shattered. There were gasps, shouts, someone crying out. I heard Susan scream my name. Graham stood over me, chest heaving, his knuckles already reddening from the punch. The manila folder lay in the snow, its papers torn loose and whipping in the wind like little white flags. You self-righteous piece of... He started, but he didn't get to finish. Mark, Jennifer's husband, grabbed him from behind, locking his arms. 2 of the guys I'd worked with on the department stepped quickly between us, their instincts kicking in. Pastor Williams was yelling something I couldn't quite make out, and the funeral director had his phone out, eyes wide. I pushed myself slowly back to my feet. Susan was at my side in an instant, her hand on my arm, her fingers gently touching my jaw where it was already beginning to swell. The pain was sharp, but it cut through everything else, leaving behind a strange kind of clarity. I looked at Graham, held in place by 3 men. His expensive suit was rumpled, his hair messed, his face twisted into a mix of fury and something else, desperation maybe. The whole cemetery had fallen silent. The only sounds were Jennifer sobbing and the wind moving through the trees. I didn't yell at him. I didn't threaten him or fire back with the kind of words I knew would cut deep. I didn't deliver some big speech. I just met his eyes and held his gaze for 3 long seconds. Then I turned away and walked toward my truck. "Bob, wait," he called after me. His voice sounded different now, less sure of itself, edged with uncertainty. I didn't stop. "Bob, we need to talk about this. Be reasonable." "Bob." I kept walking. Susan was at my side, her hand resting between my shoulders in quiet support. Behind us, I could hear Jennifer telling Graham to leave, Pastor Williams asking if the police should be called. Voices rising, overlapping, confusion spreading through the mourners like a brush fire. I reached my truck, opened the door, and lowered myself into the driver's seat. My jaw throbbed with every heartbeat, a dull, steady ache that made everything feel strangely simple. My hands were shaking as I sat there. Susan climbed into the passenger seat without a word, just quietly being beside me, her presence steadying. I took a breath, pulled out my phone, scrolled to the number I needed, and pressed call. It rang twice. McDonald Residence. This is Eleanor Shaw speaking. "Eleanor, it's Bob. Is Mr. Patton available?" There was a brief pause on the line. "Oh, Bob, I'm so sorry about Catherine. Are you all right? You sound... I need to speak to Douglas." I cut in gently. "It's urgent." "Of course. Hold on." Through the windshield, I could see Graham wrench himself free from Mark and the others and start marching toward the truck, cutting across the cemetery lawn. His face was still flushed with anger, but now there was something else etched into it, fear. "Bob." This time it wasn't Graham's voice. It was Douglas Peyton. He'd been my mother's lawyer for 40 years. He'd handled my father's estate, my mother's will, everything legal that had ever mattered to our family. "Douglas," I said, trying to keep my tone level. "I'm at the cemetery. Graham just assaulted me at Mom's graveside in front of about 60 witnesses. He's demanding that I sign papers to sell the lake house." "Christ," Douglas breathed. "Are you hurt?" "I'll be fine," I said. "But I need you to do something for me." "Name it," Douglas said. Graham was about 30 feet away now, moving fast, his expression flickering between anger and panic. "I need you to read me Mom's will," I said. "Right now. Specifically the part about the Elk Lake property. And Graham needs to hear it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Douglas spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. "Bob, are you sure you want me to do this now? Over the phone?" "I'm sure," I said. "All right. Give me one moment to access the file." By then, Graham had reached the truck. He pounded on my window, hard enough to rattle the glass. "Bob, open this door. We need to talk about what just happened." "I'm sorry, okay? I lost my temper, but you can't just—" I rolled the window down about 6 inches and held up the phone so he could see the screen. Douglas Peaton's name was clearly visible. Graham stopped mid-sentence. The blood drained from his face as if someone had flipped a switch. "Bob," Douglas's voice cut through from the speaker, oddly loud in the cold air. "I have the will in front of me," he said. "Are you ready?" "Yes," I replied. "And Graham's here too. He can hear you." "Very well," Douglas said, and I heard the faint sound of papers rustling on his end of the line. "Catherine Margaret MacDonald. Last will and testament dated November 4th, 2024. Douglas paused for a moment. "That's 4 months ago. Bob, about 3 months before she passed." Outside the truck, Graham's mouth opened and closed like he was trying to speak but couldn't find any words. Douglas went on. "Regarding the property at 1847 Brookley Road, Elk Lake, Victoria, British Columbia, also known as the MacDonald family home." He stopped briefly, then continued reading. Catherine wrote, and I quote, "This property, built by my late husband, William MacDonald, in 1968, represents not only financial value, but 40 years of memories, family gatherings, and the physical embodiment of Bill's love for his family. It is my wish that this property remain within the family and never be sold for development or profit." Beside the truck, Graham made a sound like he'd taken a blow to the gut. "Therefore," Douglas continued, "I leave this property in its entirety to my son, Robert William MacDonald, and my daughter, Jennifer Ann Harrison, to be held jointly with right of survivorship. Under no circumstances is this property to be sold, subdivided, or developed during their lifetimes. Should either Robert or Jennifer predecease the other, full ownership transfers to the survivor. This property may only pass to their children, my grandchildren, with the same restrictions in perpetuity." "That's—" Graham started. "She can't." "Furthermore," Douglas continued, his voice firm now, cutting him off, "my son, Graham Charles MacDonald, is specifically excluded from any ownership, benefit, or decision-making authority regarding this property." He hesitated just a second, then read on. "This is not done out of anger, but out of love. Graham has chosen a path that values financial success over family connection. And while I love him dearly, I cannot entrust him with the legacy his father built. I pray that one day he understands that some things are worth more than their market value." When he finished, the silence around us felt complete. Even the wind seemed to pause. Graham stood there beside the truck, staring at me, his face drained of color. "There's more," Douglas added quietly. "Bob, she recorded a video message to be played at the will reading. She wanted Graham to see it, but only if he pushed for the sale. Did he—" I looked at Graham. His face had shifted from red to white, and now it was settling into a washed-out gray. The expensive suit that had seemed so sharp at the church now looked like something he was only pretending to belong in. His hands were trembling. "Yes?" I said into the phone. "He did." "Then I think he needs to see it," Douglas replied. "Can you come to my office tomorrow? We'll be there." I ended the call. Graham stood beside my truck, rooted to the spot. Around us, the crowd that had gathered at the graveside was breaking apart. People were drifting toward their cars, throwing quick, uncertain glances in our direction, some sympathetic, some disapproving, most just deeply uncomfortable. Jennifer and Mark walked over slowly, their steps cautious, as if they were afraid the ground might crack open. "She cut me out," Graham said at last, His voice sounded hollow, scraped clean of all that swagger. "Completely. No," I replied, my jaw still throbbing where he'd hit me. "She didn't." I took a breath. "She left you everything else. The house we grew up in that sold for 800 grand, her savings, her car, her jewelry, her RRSP. When it's all settled, you'll get about $500,000. More than enough." I met his eyes. "But the lake house was never yours, Graham. Not in the way you thought. She knew you'd see it as an asset to cash out. She wanted it protected." I hesitated before finishing. "She wanted you protected too," I said quietly. "From yourself." It was like something inside him just gave way. His legs buckled, and for a moment, he looked less like a powerful developer and more like a lost little boy who had finally realized the one person who always forgave him wasn't there to do it anymore. He sagged against the side of the truck, his head lowering as if the weight of everything had finally landed on him. When he looked up again, his eyes were red. "I didn't even say goodbye to her," he whispered. "She was dying, and I didn't come. I thought," his voice cracked, "I thought there'd be time, that I could make it up to her later, that the money would somehow prove I was worth something." By then, Jennifer and Mark had reached us. Jennifer didn't reach for him. She didn't offer a hug or a hand on his arm. She just stood there, her cheeks wet with tears, anger still sharp in her eyes. "You hit Bob," she said quietly, each word deliberate. "At our mother's funeral, over money, over a house you thought you were entitled to." "I know," he said. "Do you?" she asked. "Do you really understand what you've done?" Graham didn't answer. He just stood there in his expensive suit, looking smaller than I had ever seen him, as if all the shine and polish had been stripped away. I eased myself out of the truck, my jaw protesting with a fresh wave of pain, and stepped in front of him. For the first time in years, I really looked at my brother, not the version I'd built in my head, not the success story from Toronto, but the man standing right there in front of me. "Mom left you a video message," I said. "Douglas has it. Tomorrow. His office at 10 a.m. You should watch it." His eyes flickered with something like dread. "I don't," he swallowed. "I don't think I can." "Then you'll never know what she wanted to say to you," I replied. "That's your choice." I turned to leave, then paused and looked back at him. "Graham, for what it's worth, I don't hate you," I said. "I'm furious right now, and you're going to have to answer for hitting me in front of all those people. But I don't hate you. You're still my brother." His face crumpled, the last of his pride falling away. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "God, Bob, I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize to me," I said. "Apologize to Mom tomorrow in that office. Watch her video. Really listen to what she had to say. Then maybe ask yourself what you're actually worth when you take away the Rolex and the suit." Jennifer slipped her hand around my arm. "Let's go, Bob," she said quietly. "Susan, Mark, come on. We're done here." The four of us walked away, leaving Graham standing alone among the headstones. The pages from his manila folder were still scattered over the grass, and the wind had started to rise, lifting them one by one and carrying them off into the gray afternoon. The next morning, we met at Douglas Peden's office on Fort Street. The receptionist, Eleanor, had already set out coffee and a box of tissues on the side table, like she knew exactly what kind of meeting this would be. Douglas was 73, a well-known figure in Victoria's legal circles and one of Mom's closest friends. He looked worn out, as if the weight of what he was about to do had settled on his shoulders overnight. "Thank you for coming," he said as we took our seats around the conference table, Jennifer and Mark, Susan and me, and, to my surprise, Graham. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. The suit he'd worn the day before was wrinkled, his hair less polished, his whole presence dimmed. The Rolex was gone. On his wrist was a simple watch I recognized, the one Dad had given him when he graduated high school. "Before we begin," Douglas said, turning to me, "Bob, how's your jaw?" "I'll live," I replied. "Might press charges. Haven't decided yet." Graham flinched at that, but he didn't argue. He just stared down at the table. "That's understandable," Douglas said quietly. He placed a laptop in the middle of the table and opened it. "Catherine recorded this on November 1st, about 3.5 months ago," he explained. "She knew her time was limited. She wanted to be sure certain things were said, even if she couldn't be here to say them herself. He clicked play. Mom's face appeared on the screen. She was in her room at my house, sitting in her favorite chair by the window, the one that looked out over the garden she loved so much. The autumn light coming through the window turned her white hair almost silver. She looked tired, but there was a calmness about her, a kind of quiet acceptance. "Hello, my darlings," she began. Jennifer broke down the second she heard Mom's voice. "If you're watching this, I'm gone," Mom said gently. "I hope I was able to say goodbye to each of you properly. But knowing me, I probably tried to spare you some sadness and slipped away quietly." She gave a small, familiar smile. "So, the lake house," she went on. "Douglas tells me I need to explain my decisions about it." Her expression shifted, softened in a particular way. "Graham, I'm going to speak to you directly now," she said. "I hope you're listening, sweetheart." Across the table, I heard Graham's breath catch. On the screen, Mom leaned in a little closer to the camera. "You're my firstborn," she said. "My serious, driven boy who always wanted to prove himself. I am so proud of what you've achieved. Truly. You built a successful career out of nothing but your own hard work and determination." She paused. "But somewhere along the way, my dear, you started mixing up your net worth with your self-worth." At the table, Graham lifted his shaking hands and covered his face. The image of her on the screen seemed almost brighter as she went on. "The lake house is not about money," she said. "It never was. Your father built that house with his own hands because he wanted something that would outlast him. Something solid. Something true. Every board he nailed, every beam he lifted. He was thinking about you, children. About teaching you, Graham, to fish off that dock. About watching Bobby learn to swim in that cold water. About Jennifer's birthday parties on that lawn." Jennifer was openly sobbing by then. Susan's fingers tightened around mine. "I'm not leaving you the house, Graham," Mom continued, her voice gentle but firm. "Because I know what you'd do with it. You'd sell it. You'd take the money, invest it, and feel proud that you'd maximize the asset. And in doing that, you'd miss the entire point." She let those words hang for a moment. "The value was never in the price," she said. "It was in the memories, in your connection to your father, in giving our family a place to come back to, again and again, for generations." She drew in a slow breath. "Bobby and Jennifer understand this. They've spent their lives building something you can't put on a balance sheet," Mom said. "Relationships, community, love. I'm giving them the house because they'll protect it. They'll use it. They'll fill it with their children and grandchildren and keep your father's spirit alive there." Across the table, Graham was crying openly, now silent, shaking sobs he couldn't hold back. "But here's what I want you to understand, my darling boy," Mom went on, her voice softening even more. "You're not being left out because you failed. You're not being excluded because I'm angry with you or trying to punish you. You're being left out because I am trying to save you." She let that sink in. "I'm hoping that not getting what you thought you were owed will make you stop and really look at your life, to ask yourself what you actually need, what truly matters, who you want to be when you set the money aside." On the screen, she lifted a hand toward the camera, as if she were trying to reach through it and touch us. "When your father died, we had nothing," she said. "Just a half-finished house, 3 children under 10, and a nurse's salary to keep us afloat." On the screen, Mom drew in a breath and her eyes softened. "But we had each other," she said. "We had neighbors who brought casseroles, friends who helped finish the house, a community that held us up when we were falling apart. That's wealth, Graham. That's the inheritance I'm trying to give you. The understanding that you're already rich if you have people who love you." She leaned back slightly, wearing that sad, knowing smile we all recognized. "I love you, Graham Charles MacDonald, more than you will ever truly understand," she went on. "I forgive you for the visits you didn't make, the calls you never returned, the years you chose work over family. I forgive all of it, but I'm not going to support that pattern anymore." Her voice stayed gentle, but there was steel underneath. "You have a choice now. You can stay angry about the house, or you can be grateful for the lesson. Choose wisely, my love." She shifted her gaze, as if she were looking at each of us in turn through the camera. "Bobby, Jennifer, take care of each other. Take care of that house. Fill it with laughter and love and all the things that actually matter." Then she looked back into the lens one last time. "And Graham," she said, pausing for a heartbeat, "come home sometimes. Not to the lake house," she added softly. "I mean, really come home to yourself. To us. You're always welcome." The video ended there. The conference room fell completely silent, except for the quiet sound of 4 people crying. Douglas closed the laptop with careful hands. "She also left letters for each of you," he said gently. "I'll give you some privacy to read them." He set 3 envelopes on the table, then stepped out of the room, closing the door behind him. Graham stared at his envelope like it was something dangerous. Jennifer tore hers open right away, reading through a blur of tears. "I couldn't bring myself to move yet." I just sat there, feeling Mom's presence so strongly it was as if she were sitting right beside me. At last, Graham spoke. "I was so sure she'd divide everything equally," he said quietly. "I had it all planned out. Sell the lake house for $4 million, put my share into a development deal, triple it in 5 years." He swallowed. "I was going to name the project after her, Catherine Gardens. I thought that would make up for everything." "Graham," Jennifer began, her voice breaking. "No, let me finish," he said. He lifted his head and actually looked at us, really looked at us in a way he hadn't since we were kids. "I've spent 30 years trying to make sure I was never that poor kid whose dad died," he said. "Trying to make sure I was never vulnerable, never needed anyone. I decided success meant outrunning all of that. So I built this fortress, made of money and deals and achievements. And then I stood inside it, completely alone, wondering why I still wasn't happy." His hands were shaking as he finally opened the envelope in front of him. He unfolded Mom's letter and started to read. As his eyes moved down the page, his face kept changing pain, realization, shame, and then something softer, almost like relief. When he finished, he folded the letter with care and slipped it into his pocket. Then he looked straight at me. "Bob," he said quietly, "I assaulted you at our mother's funeral, in front of everyone who loved her. There's no excuse for that. None. I'll accept whatever consequences you decide. If you want to press charges, do it. I deserve it." "I haven't decided yet," I told him honestly. My jaw still ached like hell, every word sending a dull pulse of pain through my face. Even so, he pushed his chair back, stood up, walked around the table, and then did something I never expected. He knelt down in front of Jennifer and me. Actually knelt. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not sorry I got caught. Not sorry things didn't go my way. I'm sorry for who I've been. Sorry for the years I spent being the kind of man Dad would have been ashamed of. Sorry for hitting you, Bob. Sorry for missing Mom's last years, Jennifer. Sorry for all of it." Jennifer surprised both of us by reaching out and resting a hand on his shoulder. "What did Mom's letter say?" she asked quietly. Graham pulled the folded paper from his pocket, his hands shaking. "She said," he swallowed. "She said, you were forgiven before you even asked. That's what grace means." He glanced down at the letter again. "She said, the best revenge on a wasted life is to start living a real one today." And she said, "Your father would be proud of you, not because you're successful, but because you're mine." And that's enough. By the time he finished, his voice had completely given out. "Chat GPT, Danoy. She said she'd be waiting for me," Graham went on, voice shaking, "and that she'd only have one question. Who did you love, and how did you show them? That's it. Not what did you achieve or how much did you earn. Just, who did you love?" We all sat there in silence, letting that settle into the cracks of the room, into the parts of us that didn't have words yet. Eventually, I reached for my own envelope and opened it. Mom's handwriting was there, a little uneven but still unmistakably hers, determined, like she'd been racing the clock and refused to let her hands stop her. "Bobby, my brave boy," she'd written. You spent your life running into burning buildings to save strangers. Thank you for running toward me when I needed someone most. I felt my throat tighten as I read on. The lake house is yours, she wrote. Not because you earned it, but because I trust you to protect what it represents. Teach your children what your father taught you, that the best things in this world are the ones you shape with your own hands and fill with your heart. The land will forgive whatever you plant on it. So will I. Love doesn't disappear, sweetheart. It only changes shape. I'll be there in every sunrise over that lake. If you look for me, you'll find me. Always with you, Mom. I couldn't bring myself to read the last lines out loud. Instead, I folded the letter carefully and pressed it to my chest, as if that might keep her closer for a moment longer. Douglas came back into the room a few minutes later and gave us a moment to wipe our eyes and steady ourselves. He cleared his throat gently and said there were practical things to sort out: the estate, the title transfer, Graham's share of everything else, but that none of it needed to be decided that second. Then he added that Mom had left one more instruction specifically about the lake house. Bob, Jennifer, he said. She asked you both to make her a promise. Jennifer asked what kind of promise. Douglas explained that once a year, on Mom's birthday, we were to invite Graham to the lake house for dinner. No pressure, no expectations, just an open door. Mom had told him that family wasn't something you simply inherited. It was something you rebuilt, one meal at a time. Jennifer and I exchanged a look, then glanced over at Graham still kneeling on the carpet of a lawyer's office, looking more vulnerable and human than he had in decades. Jennifer spoke first, saying we would honor that request. I agreed. Across from us, Graham could only nod, his throat too tight for words. 3 months have passed since that day. Graham went back to Toronto, but something in him was different when he left, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like coming home might actually be possible. These days, he actually calls. Not to talk about deals or investments, but just to ask how we're doing. Somewhere along the line, he sold one of his companies and set up a foundation in Mom's name to support community health clinics. He didn't call it Catherine Gardens like he once planned. He named it Catherine's Grace. He came back for Easter. Drove straight out to the lake house, where Jennifer and I were in the middle of the kind of repairs Dad would have approved of. The three of us worked on the dock together, side by side, barely saying a word, but moving in an easy, shared rhythm. When we were done, we sat on the edge of the dock with our feet in the cold water, watching the sunset spill gold across the lake. Dad built this dock twice, Graham said quietly after a while. First time, I was 8. I remember holding the boards while he hammered. I asked him why we were building it ourselves when we could hire someone. He paused, then added, He told me, because then it would be someone else's dock. This way, it's ours. We'll remember the work, not just the result. I'd forgotten that, Jennifer whispered. I hadn't, Graham said. I've spent 30 years trying to forget it. The sun slipped below the tree line, and the light began to fade. In that dim, familiar, half-dark, I could almost picture Dad standing where he used to stand, fishing rod in hand, that easy smile on his face. I could almost hear Mom's laugh drifting from the house behind us. She was right, you know, Graham said softly. The house isn't the inheritance. He motioned toward the three of us, sitting there together in the gathering dark. This is what Dad built, what Mom guarded, the thing that actually has value. We stayed there until the first stars appeared, the sky deepening above us and the water turning dark and glassy. 3 siblings who had come dangerously close to losing each other, somehow brought back together by grace, and a mother who saw further than any of us. The lake was calm. The house behind us stood steady and familiar, its windows glowing softly in the dusk. And in the quiet, in the small pauses between what we said out loud and what we no longer needed to put into words, I could almost feel Mom smiling. The soil remembers what's been planted in it. Dad planted love and hard work. Mom planted forgiveness and faith. Now it's our turn to tend what they started, to keep growing the things that truly matter. Not everything can be tallied up in bank accounts or real estate appraisals. Some things are priceless precisely because they can't be bought, sold, or carved into pieces. Like a dock built by hand. Like a family mended Like a promise kept.